I use a lot of shelf. I go really high, like 18K type of stuff, and I'll shelf way up there. And then sometimes I'll shelf up there and cut below it. So it kind of adds this sort of shift, but the air stays up there. You know, you can obsess over something, a kick sound on its own or whatever, or just a drum sound on its own. And that's great, but who cares? You're not listening to drums on its own. So if you just relinquish that, just listen to what you're hearing, it doesn't matter if that kick drum solo sounds kind of like shit. If it sounds great in the mix and it's doing its part. Sometimes I'll distort the send, bolt the send, or duplicate the track, or whatever I do to sound amp it or whatever into the effect, and then bring that back.
One of the things that I really like about your mixes is how the vocal sits in the mix. And so what's the easiest way to achieve that?
Well,
this episode is brought to you by Baby Audio. Today's guest is producer, mixer, and engineer Phil Eck. He's worked with bands like Modest Mouse, Band of Horses, and The Shins. We had a deep conversation about how to make vocals sit in the mix, how he approaches reverbs, and how to keep the emotions of the performance at the center of the mix. Hi, Phil. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Do you remember the moment when you realized that music would be a big part of your life?
Oh, honestly, music was always a big part of my life. My parents weren't super musical at all. My mother liked more music than my father did. And what she did like was a small amount, but was really cool. She liked the Beatles and Creedence Clearwater Revival and Johnny Cash and Willie Nelson, things like that. And she had maybe 5 cassettes that we listened to in the car, and they're, those artists. And I thought they're amazing. So my connection there and my interest in music was from first memories. But I got into playing guitar, got into different kinds of music, punk and goth music and the Smiths and Metallica and the Misfits. And that brought me just to, 80, 88 or so, when I first heard things in the Seattle area that really piqued my interest, which I guess would have been, the sub pop stuff that I had no knowledge of, but was exciting because it was, I grew up in a town called Bremerton, which is maybe an hour or so away from Seattle. And it was, a fine suburban life, but not the most thrilling area. And I sort of thought that music I liked came from places like London and New York and Los Angeles, and it didn't really come from Seattle. So I didn't really have an appreciation that it could be from where I'm from. And so when I first heard bands like Mudhoney and Nirvana's for stuff and Soundgarden, these early sub pop things, I just became enthralled with it, and the idea that something that cool to me, and I guess eventually to the world, could happen, across the Puget Sound from where I grew up, made me really excited about doing it. I guess doing it for real, and with that, in that I didn't have to move somewhere to do that. And that's really how it all started. Was just from my mom to probably high school, was these explosions of enlightenment, which was pretty exciting time.
And what part of the process of making the record, do you enjoy the most?
I don't know. I like all of it. I think the very beginning, when you have all this pre-production kind of ready to go, you've heard all the demos, you've discussed all the songs, and you're actually in the room together, more than likely cutting basics with drums. That kind of first get-go, that very setting up the first day, getting everything kind of rocking, and the excitement of the beginning of it is probably the most, certainly the most exciting, but definitely the most, I don't know, I almost say hopeful, that, this one's going to be the best record I've ever done, or the most exciting process I've ever had. But the excitement of it's what I really like. I like getting going and getting to know the band in a different, more intimate way, and wherever I'm recording. So that's probably the best part to me.
Yeah. One of the things that I really like about your mixes is how the vocal sits in the mix. And so what's the easiest way to achieve that?
Well, I think the easiest way to achieve in mixes, I think, is, I don't know, I guess your compression, but probably your EQ. I don't think people pay enough attention to the vocal EQ and how it can blend into the mix. Sometimes people honestly allow a bit too much low end to be in there, and I like to shelf it out a bit so you can push it higher and then have bass guitars and guitars be beefier around it without the vocals sounding thinner. So the vocals can be quite loud and have a lot of effects on them without overtaking or washing over other instruments in the mix. So I think that's probably the biggest thing I do. Maybe others don't, I don't know, but I do a fair amount of a shelving amount of low end. So just
Mm-hmm.
to push them in there more.
And when you start mixing, do you bring the vocals right away or add them later?
Later, yeah. I like to just hear what everything's doing first, and you hear more intricacies in melody structures that guitars or pianos or melodies are playing without the vocals. I want to make sure I want to make sure whatever music is happening makes sense to me. And then I bring the vocal in, I guess, assuming if I'm not the producer, if I'm just the mixer, assuming that those vocals aren't going to be conflicting in any way. Nothing's going to be conflicting to the melody structure. But definitely bring those in later just because they take up a lot of space. And I want to make sure that other things are, I guess I want to make sure we're not pushing up and down. I'm actually knowing what they are and not being forgetful of little intricacies that might be super small, but I want to make sure I know what they are before I bring in the vocal and possibly forget about it or not pay attention to those things enough.
Mm-hmm. And how much does your vocal chain in the mix change from song to song?
Oh, hardly at all. It's almost always the same.
Really?
Yeah, I don't change it as far as the actual compression in EQ that I'm using, like the actual unit or the plugin. They don't change that much. Certainly, the amounts and thresholds and maybe ratios will definitely change based on what kind of singing it is. But I usually kind of stay with the same chain. If it works, I mean, I guess I have changed it every now and again, but mostly if it's sounding great and it's the same singer, it's probably going to sound great throughout the whole process. So that's usually where I do. I usually keep it the same.
And what are you using these days?
I use a lot of UA plugins, 1176s and LA2As, plugin wise, and then I'll use often I use something kind of boring like a distressor or something like that on the as outboard in conjunction with the two. One may be faster than the other, one might be slower than the other, depending on what kind of singing, or an outboard, maybe an SSL sometimes. I'll use the one side of the stereo unit, or smart, I guess it's a copy, and or a really nice, good headroom, low noise 1176, which is sometimes hard to find. But if you got a great one and it isn't grabbing, it's not, you have actual control over the attack. I use that all the time if it's there and sounds great. So.
And when EQing vocals, do you usually cut the frequencies that bothers you first, or boost the ones that you need?
Oh, I'd probably cut first, I would imagine. If something kind of annoys me right off the bat, whatever that may be, if it's low or if it's like a 4K byte or something, I'd probably notch it out a little bit first, and maybe then probably boost a bit around it to fill it out when it feels like it's missing or has been too spiky. I would probably do that. Yeah.
Do you have any tricks to add top end to vocals without making them sound harsh?
I use a lot of shelf. I go really high, like 18K type of stuff, and I'll shelf way up there, and then sometimes I'll shelf up there and cut below it, so it kind of adds this sort of shift, but the air stays up there, but that kind of bite is not as much. But I do that even in stereo mixes. I add way really high up air, like 26K on a GML EQ or something like that, just to kind of bring back in the things that are being crushed down by compression and stuff like that. Kind of air things back up. Do that quite a bit.
And how aggressive are you with vocal compression?
It depends on the singing. If it's like rock, a lot. If it's smooth and soft, often air on the side of it, letting it be a little bit more organic, as it were, than crush it down. I don't like to hear a lot of, especially in singing, I don't like to hear soft singing. I don't like to hear a lot of breathing pushed back into the. I don't want it to be as loud as the singing. I find that annoying. So I like to let that kind of sit down there a little bit, and then so I don't push the input gain as much and softer, kind of more melodic ballady type singing. But if it's rock, I'm cranking it. I mean, especially when I'm recording, I'm LA2A slammed all the way down. It's what it's meant to do. So
Mhm.
I do that for sure. Or even something like a DBX 160, really slam it. That could be
Mhm.
great for like rock singing. But yeah.
And do you like to split vocals so you can treat them differently in the verse and chorus, for example?
Yeah, when I produce, I do that. I track it that way because
Okay.
they're almost always singing much louder in the chorus, and the compression's off, or their breathing doesn't allow them to hit that first note of the chorus as well. Maybe so. I often record verses separately, then do choruses separately, and they're probably going to be treated differently. Maybe not usually a different microphone, but maybe further away from the mic because you're singing a little bit harder or louder in the choruses. But the compression and EQs and stuff often change for that. So I track it that way if I'm producing it, and if I'm mixing, sometimes I'll split them off and have them treated differently. Just I guess it just kind of depends on how well it was or wasn't. I guess to record it.
And what techniques do you use to give vocals more size and depth?
Um, Besides just kind of general stuff like reverb, I do a fair amount of small room, not even like a uh, like a 30 seconds or so uh, like fast slap, really fast slap,
Hmm.
or a Dimension D. I use a fair amount of Dimension D style plugins. It's just spatial stuff, or like or like a couple sets down, a couple sets up, not moving. Way of just to kind of spread that out, and then depending on how much you pan it, and or I guess how loud you want it to be heard, that will also make it sound bigger. Or adding reverb to just those effects can be kind of cool, and not to the real drive signal. That can add a crazy spatial connection.
Hmm. So, what are your go to reverbs, and why do you like them?
I use a 140 EMT, real or a plugin all the time. Lately, my main one has been the Capital Chambers
Hmm.
reverb. Just really think that's very useful, and the EQ on it does a lot. That's kind of a cool thing. Pushing mids or cutting mids or adding high end without getting too sibilant. I think that does a lot. And I like them because they can just sound real and not overly digital. They sound actually like you're plugging speakers in a echoey chamber, or they just sound, they connect. I guess they feel like they're part of the sound as opposed to here's the dry vocal and then there's an effect happening around it. I feel like they're all connected when you have it
Hmm.
with EMTs and the capital chambers. I think sound really cool. So those are probably my main ones right now.
And do you ever combine different reverbs?
Yeah, yeah. I used to use the Lexicon 480L all
Hmm.
the time. That was my go-to forever and ever. And sometimes I'll go, oh, I love that on Band of Horses' first record or whatever, and I'll bring it back out and use that in conjunction maybe with a Master Room Spring or something like that, and kind of blend those two into some weird version of a
Hmm.
Room Spring thing. Uh, Again, probably a more anthemic, like grand style singing, as opposed to maybe something more a bit more rock and roll. But I do so much grand style music. I guess I end up doing that style a bit more. But I do that a lot. I kind of decide I'll bring up what I usually like, the EMT or the capital chambers, and just see if that's fitting great. If I find it boring or it's just not adding enough vibey energy, then I start messing around with different kinds uh, that I've done in the past or haven't done in a long time. Or compressing the reverb, that can be a really
Hmm.
cool way to add a different texture to it without actually messing with the unit much. Just how long the tail holds or how long you can hear that tail can really be cool by compressing it to that length.
Hmm. And do you ever use distortion or something like that on
Yeah,
reverbs?
yeah. I do. Sometimes I'll distort the send, multi-send, or duplicate the track or whatever I do to sound zamp it or whatever into the effect, and then bring that back in different levels, or sometimes I'll just have it clean and then you distort it afterwards. Sounds different than going in. Um, Definitely do that. That's a fun way to get new
Hmm.
textures into the music for sure. That's fun to do on guitar solos too.
And how do you keep your reverbs from making the mix too muddy?
EQ. dump that low end, just get rid of it, just shelve it out. I do it on the input of the, if it's a plugin, I do it on the input send, and I do it on the return on the unit itself, and that probably are shelving it on the EQ as well. Just get rid of the low end because it just wallows around and watches everything over. So if you don't need it or you don't have it, it just lets everything float, and all the other instruments around it are not being enveloped by it. So it's all about getting rid of that low end.
Yeah, and besides what you've already mentioned, is there anything else unusual or creative you like to do with reverbs?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't. I started again. I don't know if this is super creative. It's not necessarily. It's new to me because I haven't done it in the last 20 years. But I've been messing around a lot more with pre-delays.
Oh.
I used to never do pre-delay, or I guess I did maybe 20 years ago, and then I just stopped doing it for whatever reason. So like the last few mixes, I'm like, I've been fucking around with pre-delays, which has been really fun. I don't use drum reverb much because at least on the records I produce, because I'm usually in bigger rooms, I like to prefer the room sound over that. But I've been doing pre-delay on snares, kind of fun, kind of a cool thing. And it's novel to me because I haven't done it in so long. So.
And do you like do fader rides maybe on the reverb return?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Push them up in choruses or drop them down in the verse, or swell it from the last verse or the end of the verse into the chorus. So it kind of blooms into the chorus track. That's kind of a fun experiment. Or adding a new reverb that pops on certain words, or in the bridge, or the last outro chorus lines, or just to have things feel a bit more, exciting and feel like you're taking the listener on a different journey, or like, pay attention to this. It's supposed to excite you to drop it into the minimalism of the bridge or whatever is coming. That's a fun trick, just to kind of have the listener and the audience go on a journey, not just because they like the song, but the mix is taking them emotionally on a different journey. Is something I like to hear in records I didn't do, and I certainly want people to experience the records I am doing.
And what are your techniques to make the chorus bigger or give it more energy during the mixing?
Oftentimes it's just how much is panned. Like if there's guitars happening like this, and they're pushing, or whatever, it's two of them, acoustic and electric, and they're like this in the verses. Well, in the chorus, I'll probably pan them all the way out. So everything just gets a little bit bigger, and maybe a tiny bit louder, or I push the drums up, or maybe the room mics come up a bit more. So everything gets a little bit more dramatic out of the verses into the choruses. So the pop happens sometimes, not always just volume wise, but just simply the fact that it gets wider sounding, and probably a double vocal comes in, and a harmony or something like that comes in the chorus. So there's this more energy happening.
And would you automate something in the mix bus?
As far as like volume on the mix bus, sometimes. Yeah, sometimes. Sometimes. I guess I feel like I do less of that and more just in general feeding to the mix bus and panning than I would like messing with the mix bus itself. But sometimes, or even back in the day, back when it was all analog recording and mixing, I would do it when you used to attend mastering back in those days. Do it in mastering, just push it up a tiny bit there without it hitting too much compression, and make that feel a little more volume boost, stuff like that.
Have you tried Baby Audio's plugins? They're designed to inspire creativity and enhance your music production experience. From their Crystalline Reverb plugin, offering ultra-clean reflex free of metallic artifacts, to Spaced Out, a hybrid reverb and delay workstation that combines over 50 individual effects. Baby Audio provides tools that can transform your sound. Right now you can get an exclusive discount on all their plugins. Just use the code Agartha15 at checkout. Don't miss out. Click the link in the description and elevate your music today. And when mixing, how do you avoid getting carried away with the sound and stay focused on the emotion of the song?
Oh, I don't know. I guess, I mean, I've been doing this for 35 years now, and I'm sure that I used to obsess about individual sounds and stuff like that more when I was younger. I thought I had to, and then I realized that that doesn't matter. It's all about the whole thing. It's all that ever matters. The big picture is the only thing that matters. And I think it just takes trial and error to realize you can obsess over something, a kick sound on its own or whatever, or just the drum sound on its own. And that's great, but who cares? You're not listening to the drums on its own. So if you just relinquish that, just listen to what you're hearing, it doesn't matter if that kick drum solo sounds kind of like shit. If it sounds great in the mix and it's doing its part. So it took me I don't know, easily 10, 15 years to really come to that decision that none of it matters. Or maybe even like stuff that I tracked that I thought sounded amazing at the time. Like, oh, this is so kick-ass. And maybe I was getting tricked by some of my monitoring in the room or the volume I was listening to it or whatever, and got to a more of a clear mixed facility space and started listening to more of the finite tones and going, this kind of suck. Like, this doesn't sound as cool as I thought. But it's still got to be there. It cannot be there. And allowing it to go, okay, well, individually it's not as what I thought it was, but it's got to still be there because it felt that way before. Taking it back and if I just add a little bit more high and low here and push it that way, it is all there. And so the individual sounds maybe weren't as cool as I thought they were, but the song and the structure and the sound of it still there. That was probably the biggest learning that I had, and carried me to this day, that I don't focus on it as much. I just focus on the big picture. Pretty much all the time.
In your opinion, what are the key elements that help a mix connect emotionally with the listener?
Certainly the vocals. That's the thing that I always like to say, the things that my mom would understand. She likes music, but she doesn't play anything, and she just wants to know what wants to connect to the one human thing she understands. So vocals, but I think also if it's something is there and it's melodic and it has intent, I'm not a big fan of making sure of kind of subtly having things in there. I like things to be pretty in your face. If there's a melodic structure that is the main your ear's going to go to, then don't let people not hear it. Like, really make sure they're focusing on it, because that will really allow them to understand just why it's there. Why is this melody happening? Why is this keyboard happening? Why is this little guitar arpeggiation or melody line happening at all? If it's not fairly up in the mix to allow people to kind of digest it and feel it emotionally. Oftentimes the artists will, no, tuck that down. It's supposed to be subtle and maybe just like slither through. And there's moments when that's cool, but oftentimes I feel like it's best just to really push things that allow the general listener to understand why it's there, for lack of a better way to describe it. So I think that's, I mean, it's kind of hard to explain when you're not doing it, but yeah, I think that just making sure that you're not hiding things and allowing people to experience it that way is key to making records exciting and cool for people.
Do you have any habits to avoid burnout and making, I don't know, bad decisions?
Stopping. Yeah. Just I don't, the idea that all the magic happens at 2 a.m. No, it doesn't. You're tired. I back in those days when you're young, and that's, also you had no money and you're in the studio, 15 hours a day for a week, and then the record's done or whatever. You maybe cool things happen by mistake, but cool things happen by mistake and randomly at noon, at 3 p.m. I think, I feel like my work got worse the longer I would stay in the studio, and the more I was like, well, if I go till, get there 11 in the morning, go till 9, that's a fucking 10-hour day. Like I think it's good for us to walk away, and I think it's good just to walk away in general. I don't like artists to dwell on their parts too long if it's not happening sonically and performance wise, within a good amount of time. I just say, let's move on. Let's try let's play some bass. Let's do some tambourine. Let's background vocals, or let's just switch the mode. So keep people from dwelling on ideas. And that goes for myself as well. If I'm finding that I'm doing, more EQing as the day goes on, and I'm like kind of not sure why I'm doing it, then I walk away. Sometimes I'll send the first mix. Oftentimes the artist is not there with me, so I send the first mix to them, and then I say, hey, I'm leaving this as is. Give me your notes. I'm going to listen to it in my car in my home tomorrow, and I just want to break from it. And that's where I always get way more clarity out of the ideas. Something maybe too loud because I just felt like I needed you to hear it, but now it's too loud, or if something was too subtle, or it's too much low and it's too much high end. I get that after stepping away, and that's the key for me, is to make sure that I don't just start doing stuff too much.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know,
What role does pre-production play in making records today? Is still as important as before?
it is. Yeah, it's actually even more important because there's less money in
Mhm.
making records than used to be, less time. I live in Seattle. I used to work with only Seattle artists, not only, but a lot. But I haven't worked with a local artist, and I've only did one in the last 10 years, and this artist named Simmel. But that's the first thing I've done. Everything I do is from Los Angeles or
Mhm.
Australia or England or whatever, New York, and it's still cool that people come out here to work with me. There's a lot of great studios. I've been here my whole life. I have connections with all the owners. It's cheaper in the studio world than it is anywhere in the United
Mm.
States for what you can get. So people come here, but I don't know them, and we don't have the luxury of seeing them play before they go into the studio like you used to. Bands used to tour the songs before they even made them. That rarely happens anymore.
Mhm.
So they or just be able to go into a practice place with them for a week and just talk about stuff. That's hard for people's lives to do. That's hard for money to be appropriated for. So nowadays it's things like this, like it's Zooming with people and back and forth demos and um, lots and lots of conversations either on the phone or at least email threads of some kind. Try this in the bridge, try that, maybe cut the you know first verse in half or whatever it may be. That kind of structural ideas that I need to make sure that we get to the studio where we're not wasting that time or money. We've already had that at least 85 to 90% worked out, because it just makes it so much more efficient and more fun. There's nothing worse than struggling in
Mm.
the studio. Nothing worse than feeling like you're watching the clock tick and you're like, that's $100,
Mm.
that's $100, and so just yeah, to me it's imperative, and I miss having actual sit down demo time with bands.
Mm.
Um, I get it sometimes still, just depends on the budget of the record, but you know, not as much as I like to do. So doing pre-production in any fashion is very important. Very important.
Mhm. Do you prefer bands to record live together or track separately?
I usually do. If it's just like let's just say a normal, like two guitars, bass, drums kind of band. I usually have everybody record together,
Mhm.
not probably keeping much, but I like to have them record together because I like to change things as we go. Maybe it's a drum fill or maybe it's a tempo thing. And I want everybody to play it, and I want at least the singer to sing it if it's
Mhm.
going to be 4 or 5 BPMs faster, to see if it actually works for them.
Mm.
Because there's nothing worse than speeding it up or slowing down, and the main guy goes to sing or whoever, and it's just not right. And
Mm.
if you just didn't think it was going to be that big of a deal, and if the cadence is wrong or it's hard to get the words in, and whatever the deal may be. But I do like everybody to play together, just so we can all at least initially hear what the song is basically about. Doesn't mean we're probably not going to keep guitars. We're going to redo all the guitars. Maybe we'll keep bass with the drums if they are grooving and the bass tone is kick-ass, and everybody's playing to the click rate and it just feels really good. Maybe we could keep the bass with the drums in a live performance or over multiple playlists or whatever. But yeah, everything else gets overdubbed. But
Mhm.
and
Uh,
unless somebody objects, sometimes the drummer's like, I know this song. It's the
mhm.
BPMs are 125. Just I don't want to hear those guys fuck up in my headphones. I can't just give it to me and I'll play it. And that's awesome if that's how they want to do it. But it really depends.
Mhm. How do you get musicians deliver their best performance?
Honestly, just talk with them,
Mhm.
calm them down. Make sure I think the biggest part of being a record producer, besides you know having a really good sense of musical understanding and a really good way of knowing what to bring texture wise to a song is understanding people and understanding how to get them to trust you, that
Mhm.
you are there judging them 100%. You are. That's your job. But that's good. That I'm only asking you to do things over again, or any other reason to slow down, pay attention to this, because it matters. And if they feel that, they understand that, they will perform for you, if that makes sense. They're trying their best because it's their music, but they also just it wants to feel good. And if everybody's looking at them and it's like, ugh, that's a bad vibe, no one wants that. They don't play better. So just let them know that, yeah, man, we could do this all day long. If we're getting somewhere and it's sounding better at every performance, every punch, every playlist, whatever the heck we're doing, if they know that this is actually, we're doing this because it matters and it's going to be better, they'll play better and they'll be more excited and they'll be on your side, and we're all on the same team. And if they know that, that's how you get them to play better. So cool. Communication is probably the key.
How often do you work with tape these days?
Hardly ever. Hardly ever. I mean, tape's expensive. And if you get the old stock, you bake it, it's still probably fucked up somehow or has some edit nobody knew about it on it or something. I don't know. Tape machines aren't designed to be turned off all those years. They're supposed to be on all the time. That's how they were in the 90s and 2000s, early 2000s. They're just on. So you can't just start a car and have it run. You have to massage it and tune it up. And so that's all. Every time I do it or have tried it, it's always been more of a pain in the ass than it's been worth. And that's a bummer, but I don't know. I was definitely a later adapter to Pro Tools and digital recording, and not because I'm a purist to analog at all. Pro Tools sounded like shit, and I didn't like 16-bit, Digio ones, and I didn't want to listen to it. I didn't think it sounded cool. You had to throw so much crap on it just to make it sound normal, which you actually kind of still do now. But digital is so much better, and processing is so much better. And things. I love Burl converters. I love them. I love that I love transformers, and I think I like the way they stick and the presence, and I guess you could even say that sometimes even the grit of something like that, where it's not all air, it has some analog-y push. I like that. So I've tried tape, and I don't know. I think the last time I did anything that was started and we kept a lot of tape, dumped all into Pro Tools later, but was this record from this band called the Black Angels, and that was 9 years ago now, where I really, really worked on it. And so I would like to mix down to tape again. I haven't done that in a long, long time. Mixing down to half-inch would be pretty damn cool. But tracking like a 24/16 track 2-inch, I haven't done it in so long. So I miss it, but I tried it last January. This friend of mine has a 2-inch 16 track. So that'd be rad. I used to love 2-inch 16 track. I put it up and it's just like, just couldn't get people younger than me. I'm not sure how old you are, but I'm going to be 54 in July. I've been doing this since I was 19. I started on making records on tape, and tape wasn't about noise, distortion, and all that stuff. That's not the shit we did. You got fired for doing that crap back in those days. You try to make it sound big and clean and full, and Tapist was your enemy. And so all these things you did to make it not sound overly compressed, but you could if you wanted to, but you just wanted it to sound cool. I found really hard to do. Like, oh man, what level? I could get the level to be high enough or low enough to not sound kind of shitty. And the band was a little bit bummed at first. And I said, look, here's the input levels. And we all think the input levels and sound kick ass. Here's the playback. It sounds worse. And they go, it does. It sounds worse. Let's not do it. I'm sure I could have sat there and fucked with it long enough to make it to a cool, no one was looking for it to sound lo-fi. They were just looking for it to sound what they thought analog was supposed to sound like, because they're younger. They're in their 20s. They'd never messed with it before. But it was just a pain in the ass. So I would love to get to a place where I'm like, I have a couple of really great reels and I have a great working, I don't know, 820 Studio 827 or something like that. It's fancy 827 that runs, the transports are fast and awesome, and have it get back to those days of being like, oh yeah, that sounds great. But I just don't have the time. You don't have the time to fuck with, unless you do it all the time. I just don't have that time to mess with it, to get it to a place where I'm stoked on it, which is mildly depressing. But again, digital is so good now
Yeah.
that I like Fleet Fox's record "Helplessness Blues." There's analog on that. There's stuff that's quite a bit analog, and then there's songs that are from start to finish all digital. And I dare anybody to tell me which one's which on that. You know,
Mm.
there's songs that have lots of analog on it, and some and digital. All of them have some digital, but some are fully from start to finish, drums and everything, all digital. And yeah, I mean, I'd like somebody to tell me which ones are which because I don't think they could. And that's 2010 technology, as it were. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
Uh-huh.
It's about, and also there's a lot of bands would love to be able to say they can make a record on analog, but I don't know if there is practice to it. I don't realize
Yeah.
people don't realize how much you have to perform when you're making a tape record. Um,
Mm-hmm.
be interesting to try that for real, but you have to play. You always are playing. You can't do the same kind of comping. You can't do the same kind of editing. You can do a lot of stuff, but you have to perform. You want a better version of that verse line, you got to sing it again, man. And that's something a lot of kids don't know.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if kids can handle it.
And do
But
you?
I use Pro
Oh,
Tools. I use Pro Tools a lot that way though. I don't. I like people still to perform. I still do
no.
punches on
Uh-huh.
tapes. It's not always, but a good amount. If it's a problem and I know that they're going to do it over and over again on a different playlist,
Mm-hmm.
then I definitely sit there and work with. No, you need to hit that note and then come down. Like it has to be right
Cool.
there. You can't swoop in or whatever. So I'll do that for sure. So I still act as if it's a little bit tapey in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Do you use any tape plugins when you mix?
No, not
No.
really. No, not really. No, I mean, I mess with them every now and again. That's a fun thing, but some people use them as like the main sound. And I just never really felt they were. Mostly, I feel a lot of tape stuff, emulator stuff, is bringing out the shit that I didn't like in tape. Like I don't need that. I don't. Again, I'm not trying to make this a little bit distorted in that
Uh-huh.
regard, or trying to make this tape hissy bullshit or poppy sounds. So I don't. I can understand it as far as a warmth thing, or I can
Mm-hmm.
understand it as far as like a compression thing, but I don't think they do it in my ears as well as the original did. So it mostly just annoys me. So I
Mm-hmm.
just kind of take them off. But I've done them on like acoustic guitars are fun with on acoustic guitars. Things that maybe are really if I didn't record it, things that people send me that are mixed that I feel needs to have more character. I'll do it that way, just because it's kind of fun. But as far as like in the mix or on the bus, almost never.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now I have a couple of questions from our audience for you.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So the first one is in one of your interviews, I heard you like to record multiple drum takes for a song. What is your process for comping and editing them?
I guess it just comes down to what I think is really cool. Like when I record any artist, I like to get a general template. Like this is
Mm-hmm.
how you play the song. Like, this is the tom fills. This is where you crash. This is where you don't crash. This is the way the song goes. So we'll do that maybe I'd say 5 or 6 times just to make sure we have good timing of it or really great fills. Sometimes it'll be smoother than others. And I like people to do that all the way across as much as they can, just for vibe. Just they're in the moment, they're feeling great. They'll just play the way they play without thinking. And then I have people do takes where they don't do that. They play opposite shit. Just go nuts. Play
Mm-hmm.
whatever the hell you want. Play it any way you want, because you might get something that's super cool, especially towards the end of the song,
Mm-hmm.
where you want the outro to feel just a little bit more unhinged or a little bit more exciting because the drummer's maybe hitting harder or he's just not playing the same fills the way he had prior choruses or whatever. And then I just pick what makes sense, vibe wise, timing wise. Certainly, I'm not a strict. You have to be on the grid. This has to be, really, really, really uh, rigid. I don't almost ever want that, but I do want it to not feel like it's speeding up and slowing down in an awkward way, of course. But so basically, it comes down to that. Really great template, and then add excitement in. Probably I add excitement in as we start overdubbing. as we start
Mhm.
adding other tracks. So everybody's kind of on the same page, and then we know that all works, and let's throw this in there because it's, I don't know, let's make it more exciting, or maybe it just could go somewhere and allows the guitar solo at the end to freak out a bit more. The end vocals can be a little bit more dynamic or unhinged because the drums, the band around them are becoming that way.
Mhm.
So that's how I mainly do it.
Cool.
Yeah.
How are you mixing these days? On a console, hybrid setup, or 100% in the box?
Hybrid setup. Yeah, I mix on a board because I just like it. I spread it out as much as I feel like I need to. Sometimes I'm doing sub mixes in the box and having two faders, drums. Maybe I'll have like 8 sub mixes, or sometimes I spread the whole thing out. If there's not a lot of overdubs, I'll probably spread them all out. Like say
Mhm.
there's 30 tracks, I'll probably keep them all on the board because it's fun and it's easy. But I sometimes do moves on the board. I sometimes do automation on the board. Sometimes I don't. It's all a hybrid. Um, again, that's kind of because I think it sounds cool. I think even though you could do so much in the box, it's so much better than it used to be, and plugins are so much better, and just general lack of analogness in the digital world, mixing wise, especially, is so much better. I still think it's pretty cool to hear things spread out. I like to hear. I think there is a processing difference in hearing each track having its own IO and having
Mhm.
its own dedicated analog digital. I do think there's something to that. And I do think there's a lack of throwing shit at it to make it feel kind of normal if it's spread out on a board. So it doesn't always mean I'm using the board as far as like anything than a big summer,
Mhm.
but sometimes I am, and I do. I EQ it on the board. I'll patch a compressor across the board. I'll compress the master fader on the board. Sometimes I do both, kind of a master on the hybrid and master in the on the analog board. But yeah, that's
Mhm.
a little bit old school, but also just sounds cool to me.
Mhm.
So
Cool.
yeah,
Mhm. How important do you think vocal coaches are for singers?
huge, 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 huge. I haven't. There's a guy named Wolf Carr that lives in Portland. Used to live here. Um, I send people to him while making the record, before making the record, after we made the record, for them to work on stuff live. I think a singer's ability to have control over breathing, openness, and allow me to direct them and have them understand what they can physically do to have that happen
Mm.
is imperative to great vocal performances these days. Um, I just work with so many artists like say Shins or Fleet Foxes or whatever. There's just a lot, or even Bad Horses back in the day, where there's a lot of singing, and that sounds silly, but it's really anthemic. Like there's moments where you're really up there, and you have to
Mhm.
be up there, and there's a choral vocals around you, and all those vocals are you. There's no other guy doing it. That takes a lot of control, and a lot of control that you need to understand how to not just hit the note, but how do you hold your body, and
Mm.
how do you hold your chest, and how do you hold your neck, and how do you breathe, and how do you understand breathing, and making sure you are breathing, because some people kind of hold their breath and tighten up, and that's, you're going to get constricted notes that way. Anyways,
Mhm.
so yeah, I think it's huge. I think vocal, and I've had so much. I've never had a guy or a girl work with a vocal coach and not have it become better ever. It's never been a detriment. It's always been a positive. So it's huge.
Mhm. How did you start working with Jack and Dino?
Well, I went to the Art Institute of Seattle, which was a recording school here in Seattle. It was terrible. I hated it. It was just like, we only had like maybe 2 days a week for maybe 3 hours each time in the actual recording studio. It was dated even for 1990. The technology was pretty
Mhm.
old school. Anyways, I just didn't like it. And there was a teacher there named Tom Dyer, and he was just kind of Captain Beefheart, kind of punk rock dude. I don't know how old he was at the time, probably not even 40. But he liked me, and I told him, I want to quit the school. I hate it. I don't want to do it. And he's like, I don't do that. You at least finish the school, and we as teachers think you could actually do this. We think you actually could be good at this. You know what you're talking about. You understand what we're saying, and you're learning a lot.
Mhm.
And he goes, I was assisting at this other studio, and I quit because it was terrible. And he goes, "Oh, you should work with Jack and Dino." I was like, yeah, right. And a couple of days later, I got a call. Jack said, "Oh, Tom Dyer said you should come down to the studio." So I went down to the studio and met this guy, Rich Hinklin, who was the owner of the studio. And I worked with Rich, I worked with Jack, I worked with anybody who came through the door. I assisted, and also was the kind of in-house guy at the studio called Word of Mouth, which was a famous studio before that. The same studio was called Reciprocal, where Jack made all the early grunge records, and I worked with him. And he was unbelievably kind to me, very knowledgeable, very smart. And just let me watch him. And that's pretty much all I did was I ran cables and headphones, and sometimes was on the board and sometimes on the tape machine. But mostly I just watched and learned. And I told this story a couple of days ago, but he asked me, he would often just leave and go get food or whatever. And I kind of just run the situation, run the board for whatever. I can't remember what artist it was, but he said to me, I want you to build me a de-esser, like an actual side chain. And I was like, fuck, I have no idea how to fucking do that. And I was like, de-esser. I mean, I knew kind of, but I'd never done it before. And it's like, oh man, it's just gonna suck. So I was like, okay, signal, side chain, EQ. I guess so. I remember sitting there, and Jack walks in, looks at me, and goes, nope. And he just kind of does it the right way. And I was like, and he goes, looks at me, goes, you might want to write that down. So I wrote it down, and I used that same chain up. It just took me like someone to go, come on, this is how you do it. And the little things like that were like, or I make up cabinets for him and guitar cabinets, and he's like, just turn it that way. It's too close to the cone or whatever. And I'm like, okay. Just, observing somebody was cool. But the biggest thing I learned from Jack was honestly, just kind of like band fights or when people were coaching or how to handle people. He was really good at diffusing. If the guitar player and the bass player are literally going to beat the shit out of each other right now, he was really good at just making it not happen and diverting it to some other way. And all of a sudden people were like, okay. And they forget about their issues or whatever. He never raised his voice at anybody. He never got in fights. He just was really good at keeping people calm and getting what he needed out of them really fast. And he was really good at vocal coaching and teaching someone how to sing, if they're singing a little flat, a little sharp, vocal tricks, headphone tricks, stuff that I had no idea what that was when I was 19. But that's how it started. And he was just so cool. I worked for him for about 2 years. Yeah.
Another question here. What are you using on your mix bus these days?
I always use a SSL or Smart and a GML EQ. Always. Always. I've done that exact same chain. I bet it's been 30 years now. We're probably about that. That's just what I think sounds cool. I've tried a whole bunch of other stereo compressors, Neves. They're usually too slow for me. Even some newer ones. I've tried a whole bunch of different stuff, and it just always comes back to the SSL. I just like the way it does what it does. And I always EQ after the compression, always. So I'm kind of adding stuff in that the compression is kind of crushing down.
Cool.
So that's in the chain.
Phil, thanks again for being here. It was great having you on the podcast.